Volume 5, Chapter 4, Narendra's second and third visits to the Master. When individuals endowed with self-reliance and steadfast goals see greatness in others, they acknowledge it without hesitation and rejoice in their hearts. And if they meet a great soul who possesses an overwhelming majesty, they consider this deeply and their minds become amazed and enchanted for a time. But this cannot distract them from their goal and induce them to imitate that great soul. The followers of such a one do not show the effects of their teacher's influence immediately. For that to happen, a long association, intimate companionship, and a bond of love are required. Narendra was in that situation after his meeting with Sri Ramakrishna at Dakshineshwar. Although Narendra was fascinated by and attracted to the Master's wonderful renunciation and saw that his thoughts and speech were in complete harmony, he was not ready to accept the Master as his life's ideal. When he returned home after his first visit to Dakshineshwar, he frequently thought about the Master's unique character and behavior, but he indefinitely put off fulfilling his promise to visit again and concentrated on his regular activities. The reason for this postponement was probably that the influence of his Western education that led him to believe that the Master was a monomaniac. In addition, he was busy with his meditation practices and college studies as well as his daily music lessons and physical exercises. Apart from all this, Narendra was following the ideal of the Brahmo Samaj and was forming study and prayer groups in different neighborhoods of Calcutta for the mental and spiritual improvement of his friends. So it is not surprising that Narendra's numerous activities buried all thought of visiting Dakshineshwar in his mind for a few weeks. But although he was preoccupied with his studies and his busy daily schedule, his memory and devotion to truth would urge him from time to time to keep his promise to visit Dakshineshwar by himself. So one day, about a month after his first visit, Narendra returned to Dakshineshwar alone and on foot. He later described his second visit to Dakshineshwar to us. We shall now narrate it to the reader. Narendra said, I had no idea that Dakshineshwar temple was so far from Calcutta because I had been there only once before and that was by carriage. I used to visit Dasharathi Sanyal, Satkari Lahari and other friends at Baranagore and thought that Rasmani's temple garden was somewhere near their house. But this time it seemed as if the journey would never end, however far I walked. After asking many people the way, I arrived at Dakshineshwar at last and went straight to the Master's room. I found him sitting deep in meditation on the smaller bed that stands beside the bigger one. There was no one with him. When he saw me, he joyfully called me to him and made me sit down on one end of the bed. He was in an ecstatic mood. He muttered something to himself that I couldn't understand, looked hard at me, and then arose and approached me. I thought we were about to have another crazy scene. Scarcely had that thought passed through my mind when he placed his right foot on my body. Immediately I had a wonderful experience. My eyes were wide open and I saw that everything in the room, including the walls themselves, was rapidly whirling around me and receding. At the same time, it seemed to me that my consciousness of self, together with the entire universe, was about to vanish into a vast, all-devouring void. This destruction of my self-consciousness seemed to me the same thing as death. Terrified, I felt death right before me, very close. Unable to control myself, I cried out loudly, "Ah, what are you doing to me? Do you know I have parents at home?" When the Master heard this, he gave a loud laugh. Then he touched my chest with his hand and said, "All right, let it stop now. It needn't be done all at once. It will happen on its own in a good time." To my amazement, the extraordinary vision vanished as suddenly as it had come. I returned to my normal state and saw things outside and inside the room standing as still as before. Although it had taken so long to describe all this, it actually happened in only a few moments, and yet it changed my whole way of thinking. I was bewildered and kept trying to analyze what had happened. I saw this experience had begun and ended in obedience to the will of this extraordinary man. I had read about mesmerism and hypnotism in books and I wondered if this was something like that, but my heart refused to believe that it was, for even people of great willpower can create such conditions only in weak minds. And my mind was by no means weak. In fact, up to then, I had been proud of my intelligence and willpower. Ordinary people are overwhelmed and become puppets under the influence of great personality, but this man hadn't bewitched me or reduced me to that condition. On the contrary, when I first met him, I had decided that he was mad. Why then should I have suddenly found myself in this state? I couldn't come to any conclusion. It seemed an utter mystery to me. Then I remembered the words of a great poet. There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy. I thought that this might be one of those things. After much reflection, I concluded that this mystery could not be solved. I determined to be on my guard lest he exert more influence over me in the future. The next moment I thought, how can I consider this person mad when he was able to destroy the strong structure of my mind at will, a mind that is endowed with tremendous willpower, and reshape it as if it were a lump of clay, making it think as he wished? But during my first visit, he took me aside and said so many strange things. How can I believe them to be true or to be anything other than an eccentric outburst? Because I couldn't determine the cause of the wonderful experience I've just described, I could come to no firm conclusion about this person who was as pure and simple as a child. From my boyhood, I had always used observation, investigation, reasoning, and argumentation to form an opinion about a person or a thing. But on that day, my character was dealt a terrible blow which distressed my heart. Consequently, a fierce determination arose in my mind to truly understand the nature and power of this wonderful man by any possible means. Thus was my mind occupied with various thoughts and resolutions throughout the day. After this last incident, the master became quite a different person. He began to feed me lovingly as he had during my first visit, and he treated me as cordially as if he had known me for a long time. He behaved with me just exactly like a man who meets an old friend or relative after a long separation. But feeding and entertaining me, talking to me, and making jokes with me didn't seem to satisfy him. His affectionate behavior created a good deal of anxiety in me. As the day was coming to a close, I asked leave to go. This seemed to make him unhappy, and as on the previous occasion, he demanded a promise. Say that you will come back again soon. So on that day I promised as before, and then I returned home. We do not know how long it was before Narendra returned. After encountering the master's miraculous power, Narendra had an intense desire to know him. So it seems it must have been long before he came to Dakshineshwar. His eagerness must have brought him back to the master as soon as he was able. Because he was attending college, the third visit probably took place on a weekend. When Narendra wanted to investigate something, he lost all interest in food, sleep, or relaxation. He would take no rest until he had mastered the situation. So quite naturally, he was extremely anxious to understand the master. It is certain that during the third visit, Narendra was extremely cautious and very, very much on his guard lest he fall under any hypnotic spell as before. But what happened was inconceivable. We shall now present what the master and Narendra told us about it. On that day, Master invited Narendra for a walk in Jadoo Malik's garden just south of Dakshineshwar compound, either because the temple complex was crowded with devotees or for some other reason. Jadoo and his mother were very devoted to the master, and they had left a standing order with the manager that if the master wished to walk in the garden when they were absent, the parlor facing the Ganges should be kept open for him. On that day, the master walked with Narendra in the garden on the bank of the Ganges. As the master and Narendra talked about various things, they eventually came to the parlor where the master sat down and soon went into samadhi. Narendra sat nearby, closely watching the master's condition when the master suddenly touched him, just as he had on previous occasion. Although Narendra was on his guard, he was completely overwhelmed by that powerful touch. This time he became completely unconscious, not partially as before. When he regained his normal consciousness after some time, he saw the master passing his hand over his chest and smiling at him sweetly and gently. Narendra did not tell us anything about what he experienced when he lost his outer consciousness. We thought that he did not tell us about it because it was a secret. But one day in the course of conversation, the master told us that what had happened during that incident, and we realized that Narendra had no memory of it. The master told us that day, after Narendra lost consciousness of his current incarnation, I asked him many questions, such as who he really was, where he had come from, and why he had been born, how long he would stay in this world, and so forth. He entered his innermost being and found the correct answers to my questions. These answers confirmed what I had already learned about him in visions. It's forbidden to reveal those things, but I can tell you this. On the day he knows who he really is, he will no longer remain in this world. With a strong effort of will, he will immediately give up his body through the power of yoga. Narendra is a great soul, perfect in meditation. Later, the master described to us one of his earlier visions concerning Narendra. We shall now mention it here for the reader's convenience. But when the master told us about it, it seemed that he had this vision before Narendra first visited Dakshineshwar. The master said, "One day I found that my mind was soaring high in samadhi along a luminous path. It soon transcended the stellar universe and entered the subtle realm of ideas. As it ascended higher and higher, I found the path lined with ideal forms of God and goddesses on both sides. My mind then reached the outer limits of that region, where a luminous barrier separated the sphere of relative existence from that of the Absolute. My mind crossed that barrier to enter the transcendental realm, where no corporeal being was visible. Even the gods dare not enter the sublime realm and are content with keeping their seats far below. But the next moment I saw 7 venerable rishis seated there in samadhi. It occurred to me that these rishis must have surpassed not only humans but even gods in knowledge and holiness, in renunciation and love. Lost in admiration, I was reflecting on their greatness when I saw a portion of that undifferentiated luminous region condense into a form of a divine child. The child came to one of the rishis, tenderly clasped his neck with his lovely arms, and addressing him in a sweet voice, tried to drag his mind down from the state of samadhi. That magic touch roused the rishi from the superconscious state, and he fixed his half-opened eyes upon the wonderful child. His beaming countenance showed that the child was the treasure of his heart. In great joy, the divine child spoke to him, "I am going down. You must come with me." The rishi remained mute, but his tender look expressed his assent. As he gazed at the child, he again became immersed in samadhi. I was surprised to see a fragment of his body and mind then descending to earth in the form of a bright light. No sooner had I seen Narendra than I recognized him to be that rishi. The master described this vision to us in his unique, simple language. It is not possible for us to reproduce that language exactly. Having no alternative, we have briefly described this vision, keeping his language as far as possible. When at another time we asked him about the divine child in the vision, we learned that the master himself had assumed the form of that child. Narendra was completely dumbfounded when the influence of the master's divine power put him under the same hypnotic spell for a second time. He deeply felt the insignificance of his mental and intellectual power compared to the unsurpassable divine power. His former belief that the master was a monomaniac was changed, but he cannot say that this encounter brought him to understand the meaning and significance of what the master had told him privately during his first visit to Dakshineshwar. He felt that the master must be an extraordinarily great soul endowed with divine power, and that he could at will drive the mind of a person like him to higher path. He also understood that because the master's will was completely identified with that of God, he would not have to desire to raise everyone's mind to a higher realm, because a person must work through his or her own karma. Narendra was therefore fortunate to receive such unsolicited grace from this great soul. Narendra was forced to come to this conclusion, and he had to adapt many of his former ideas accordingly. Previously, he had been strongly against accepting a man who, like himself, was weak and short-sighted as a guru or a guide to the spiritual world, and carrying out all his instructions without question. This attitude had been strengthened considerably when he joined the Brahmo Samaj. But the 2 last incidents dealt terrible blows to his beliefs. He realized that on rare occasions some great souls are born in this world whose extraordinary renunciation, austerities, love and purity surpass what the limited minds of ordinary people conceive of as God. And ordinary people would benefit greatly if they accepted those great souls as gurus. Narendra did in fact agree to accept the master as his guru, but at that time declined to accept all of his words indiscriminately. Because of his experience in the past lives, Narendra had a strong belief from his childhood onward that one cannot realize God without renunciation. For that reason, although he was a member of the Brahmo Samaj, he had no desire to attend its meetings concerning marriage reform. Narendra's inclination towards renunciation now increased tremendously as he observed the all-renouncing master and realized how extraordinary was the power he wielded. At this time, only one thing greatly concerned Narendra. Upon coming in contact with such a wonderful and great soul, one usually either believes that person's words without evaluating them fully, or indeed without testing them at all. He resolved to protect himself from that by any means. For that reason, although the last two meetings had awakened in Narendra love and respect for the master, he decided not to accept anything that the master said about his visions and experiences without experiencing them himself and examining them carefully, even if this incurred master's displeasure. So, on one hand, he earnestly kept his mind open to receive the novel and hitherto unknown truths of the spiritual world, and on the other, he engaged himself from then on in subjecting the master's visions and his behavior to rigorous testing. Narendra's keen intellect revealed to him that the words spoken by the master during his first visit, which had led him to consider master as a monomaniac, could only be understood as meaningful if he believed that the master was an avatar. But how could this truth-seeking and rational mind admit this so quickly? He decided that if God ever gave him the ability to understand those words of the Master, he would consider them at that time. So, without forming any further opinion, he devoted himself to learning from the Master and discussing with him how to be blessed with God realization. When a powerful mind replaces an old idea with a new one, it faces strong resistance from within. Narendra now encountered this situation. Although he realized the wonderful power of the Master, Narendra could not accept him completely, and although he was attracted to the Master, he tried to stay away from him. We shall find out later what happened as a result of these efforts.